Reinvention or die. That is the topic for this week's Impactful Teamwork podcast. So, super excited to have you here today again. My name's Julia Felton. I'm your host and guide for about the next 20 minutes while we want to delve into the topic of reinvention. And it just seems like it's a really appropriate topic to look at here in the new year when people have decided or are still deciding what they want to achieve in 2026. And I think the really important thing about reinvention is it's a topic that is being bandied around a lot at the moment. And for a lot of people, I think reinvention can seem a little bit scary, anxious, because they think it's about creating something new. And it is. But what I'd like to say is that for me, when we're thinking about what do we reinvent, it's about how do we take the best of the past and bring that into the future in a new and different way. So that's really what I want to explore today. So, at a fundamental level, reinvention is a mindset shift about the way that we succeed and we manage change within businesses. And you might think about this a little bit like the change in mindset from a fixed to a growth mindset. That's what changes the way that we learn and our learning outcomes. If we've got a fixed mindset, we don't think it's possible to change. If we've got a growth mindset, we're always embracing change and things that can happen. Reinvention kind of fits in this whole area where we need a growth mindset in order to be reinventing. So, let's just set the context a little bit more about what reinvention is. Reinvention is a practice of embracing change, and we're doing this by reimagining and remaking something so that it gets new results, has new qualities, attributes, and is just generally changing to reflect the times that we're in. I think, and this is one of the reasons I really like it, is it's a systemic approach to thriving in chaos. Because it's all about how do we continually learn from the environment about what's happening, change, and to make it different. And this is what I see in nature. Nature is continually reinventing, readapting itself to the circumstances that are around it, whether it's the global conditions or man-made interventions that stop nature operating in the way that it does. And I think when we really think about it at a deep level, reinvention is a way of creating a sustainable system that manages to harmonize this continuity of continuing to move forward with incorporating change at the same time. And if we were to look at a health analogy, I really see reinvention as a bit like our immune system. If we don't have an immune system, our body can't cope and we will eventually pass on because we can't keep away all of the diseases in the environment that are going to impact us. So we need our immune system to keep us healthy. And I think that's exactly the same with reinvention. We need reinvention in order to keep our businesses healthy so that they can survive and thrive going forward. Because we've all seen a number of businesses that have fallen by the wayside because they haven't adapted and reinvented to survive. So, what I am seeing is this fundamental shift where reinvention is now becoming center mind for a lot of CEOs. And whereas in the old days, reinvention was something at the fringes of our strategy, it's now really at the heart of corporate leadership. And interestingly, some recent statistics from PwC showed that CEOs wish they can free themselves more from the current operations to spend more time reinventing than they already are. And I think the emphasis on reinvention is really highlighted when we think about Accenture, because Accenture have actually restructured themselves to create a whole reinvention services division. So I think that really is testament to the fact that the big consultancies are realizing that reinvention isn't a just done and won. It's a continual process that businesses need to be adapting. And this is why reinvention is no longer being seen as a side project or a side initiative. It's actually part of the operating system of businesses. It needs to be embedded into the DNA of everything we do. And more leaders are finding that reinvention is a key and crucial part of their role. So I'm really passionate about reinvention, and I've spent quite a lot of time and invested quite a lot of time and money in learning more about reinvention tools and techniques. It forms a key pillar of my unbridled teamship roadmap. Some of you will be familiar with that. That is my proprietary model about how to create high performing businesses and enable leaders to create a lasting impact legacy. And it follows the pillar of what we call reimagine the future. So let's just think about it. Why is it important to reimagine the future? It's because business just isn't business as usual anymore. If we look at Fortune 500 companies, only 12% of the companies that existed 60 years ago are on the Fortune 500 today. So let me say that. Only 12% of the companies that were on the Fortune 500 60 years ago are there today. So that means we have lost an incredible 88% of the companies. And some other statistics suggest that the Standard & Poor's companies, 50% of those Standard & Poor's companies will be obsolete in 10 years' time. So hopefully those statistics just drill home to you how important reinvention is, because if companies don't adapt, you'll be part of that 88% who haven't survived the last 60 years. So, of course, this is a very different mindset that we've got happening now to the old industrial age, where the industrial age was you went to work, you were at that job for pretty much most of your life, and nothing really changed. But now I think we can all agree we live in a very dynamic, uncertain world. And as a result of that, companies need to continue to adapt and thrive. And of course, right now, we only have to look at the advent of AI and how that is fundamentally changing businesses. And if you and your business aren't embracing AI, I think there is a good chance that you won't survive in the long term. Now, the other reason for reinvention and why this has become such a hot topic is that we know that 70% of all change efforts fail. So we've actually got to do something about this more differently. And I was talking with a client the other day, and we were talking about reinvention, and he's, how do you get this to work into your system, Julia? I'm like, the way that we put reinvention into the business is it actually has to become part of our culture. It needs to become the DNA of the business so that we realize that we are always looking for different ways to do things, always looking for ways to improve the business and make it better, whether that's a systems, a process, a product, or a service. Because if we don't really start thinking like this, our business is going to no longer survive in the long term. So let's just think a little bit about a business life cycle. So a business, if you were just to make this very simplistic, it has a startup phase, a growth phase, a maturity phase, and a decline phase. And every business goes through that model. Now, the length of these different areas can change dramatically, and we're going to look at that in a minute. But to begin with, I just want you to understand that anything in life, a person, a plant, everything, we all have a startup phase when we're birthed, then we go through a growth phase, then we get to maturity, and then we move into decline. So just like the seasons move through this model, so does a business. And so if we took it at the seasons, the startup phase is spring, when things sort of start getting planted or at least starts to show up through the surface of the earth. Then we have the growth phase. Then we go to the maturity where we often tend to harvest, and then we move into decline. And what I'd like to think about, if you think about these 4 steps, we think about a business going through what we call an S curve. And actually, if you think about it, a business typically goes through this phase of startup, growth, maturity, decline. Then it goes to another phase of startup, growth, maturity, decline, and then again. And the most obvious way is if we think about something like the iPhone. If you think about the early iterations of the first iPhone, they bear very little resemblance to the iPhone that we have today. But you see the iPhone continually going through these stages. They didn't get to the growth phase of the first version of the iPhone and go, oh, we're done. No, they went and started to build and change and adapt. So I think what's really interesting is when we look at the life cycle of businesses and how they've changed over time. Because I think in the industrial era, it's true to say that all the research shows that the average lifespan of a company back there was around 75 years because things didn't really change. People came to work for their entire life. They worked exactly the same thing. Somebody was on the production line putting widgets in boxes, and that is all they did. Then came the advent of the internet, and that life cycle shortened to about 15 years. So what does that mean? It means for many of us, we actually don't ever work in the same business through our entire life cycle because that business doesn't survive. So we therefore have to change and adapt to our skills as well. We only have to think about companies that didn't change and adapt, companies like Kodak, like Blockbuster, like Nokia. They all had high levels of growth, but they didn't reinvent themselves at the top of the cycle, and so they fell into decline. So when we're thinking about this S curve with the startup, the growth, the maturity, and the decline, the really important thing to remember is that companies need to start reinventing before they get to the maturity phase. So that seems really counterintuitive, doesn't it? Just when you are harvesting the rewards of all of your hard work, you already need to be thinking about what you're going to be doing next. And in fact, the statistics show that if you wait until you get to the decline phase of your business, only 12% of those companies are able to reinvent in the decline stage and still survive going forward. So you've got a much higher probability of success of survival if you reinvent before you get to the maturity stage. And if we just think about this in terms of a farmer, what's very interesting is that maturity phase where he harvests all the seed in like August. The farmer harvests that. He doesn't wait until the winter to plant. No, he harvests and then he plants again for the next year. So this is what we need to be doing in our businesses. When we get to that maturity phase, we need to be replanting for the next iteration of the business. So I've just said that the average lifespan of companies was 75 years and moved to 15. I wonder what we think it is nowadays. Some work by the Reinvention Society has realized that actually, on average nowadays, the duration of a company is about 3 years, unless it reinvents. Now, that is an average. Some companies are reinventing every 12 months. Think about companies maybe in the tech sector right now. Whereas companies that have a lot more infrastructure, a lot more machinery, maybe something in mining, that might be an 8 to 10-year cycle. But on average, it's about 3 years. There's some really big implications there for how we lead our businesses, because if the average lifespan of a business is only 3 years, our long-term forecasting for 10 years is pretty much obsolete. And this is why we've been looking at new ways of planning businesses and looking at different scenarios and having a much more dynamic long-term strategy and long-term plan in order to adapt and cope with all the changes that the business will go through. And I wanted to share with you some statistics from the University of Queensland, their Careers and Employability Office, because I think this is really interesting. As a result of this shorter lifespan, it means that the average person today will have 17 jobs across their different careers. So you might want to think about what skills and capabilities are needed to succeed in today's world. What's the safest way to approach your product portfolio? And what's the best way to approach financial planning? What's the optimal level of debt? How should you budget? Because you've got to avoid these natural declines by continuously renewing, recreating, and reinventing the business. So let's talk a little bit about what reinvention mindset we actually need to have in order to make this work. I think there are 3 pillars to this reinvention mindset. And the first is curiosity. And this is all about asking what if. And this is the antidote to complacency. Because if leaders are always asking what if, we are keeping our teams open to new opportunities, new ideas, new approaches. And it means we're always scanning the environment to look for ways to reinvent. And the second mindset is all about adaptability. So this is embracing the ambiguity and change as opportunities, not threats. And I think it's really interesting, this adaptability. What I'd really like to encourage you to do is start being curious about what is happening in other industries. Because what we're seeing is that a number of reinvention opportunities are coming by leveraging ideas that have happened in other industries. So if we really want to be adaptable and, embrace opportunities rather than threats, we really need to look outside of the box and see where something is working somewhere else and see how we can then match that to our own business. And then the third reinvention mindset pillar is that of courage. Because actually we have to be really courageous to let go of what no longer serves us. We've got to make some bold decisions, even when it feels uncomfortable. And it means we have to have strength to move forward into uncharted territory that we don't know what we are going to do with it. Because I think to survive and thrive in a risky, interconnected world of constant flux, you must make reinvention a part of your daily life. So I want to just leave you with a practical framework. I call this the 4 Rs of Reinvention. So what do you need to do before you can start reinventing? The first step is to reflect. Reflect on what's working and what's not working. So this means you have to be really honest and candid about your current situation and what is going on. Because if we don't spend time reflecting, we don't see what hasn't been working. In fact, we're very blinkered. So some key questions for reflection you might want to use are, what are we doing right now? Where are we succeeding? What challenges or obstacles are we facing? What warning signs or icebergs are there out there that we might be ignoring? And are our current strategies aligned with our long-term purpose and goals? So what this might mean is that you actually need to have a look at what are new things you need to start doing, new habits, new processes, new systems that you need to put into the business. What do you need to stop doing, and that's what requires the courage, and what do you need to continue to do? How do you continue to leverage your strengths that are aligned with your purpose? The second R of this framework is to reimagine. So this is about big picture thinking. Visualize the possibilities beyond the status quo. Dream boldly. This is where we're really thinking outside of the box about what's possible. What could we do if we had all the money, all the resources? What could we do if there were no challenges or constraints? If we started fresh today, what would we do differently? Then the third R of the practical framework of the 4 Rs is recalibrate. How do we create small actionable steps towards our change? Because if we look at the concept of Kaizen, it's all about small micro steps that collectively compound in order to make a bigger change. So what are some of the small changes that we can do? And perhaps we want to recalibrate, we want to focus on our agility, the things that we are doing really well. And when we recalibrate, we also want to be trying some experimentation. What's a small experiment that we can try today that could have a big impact in the future? But we do this as a small experiment. So if it doesn't work, it's not going to adversely impact the business. So recalibration all involves experimentation. And then the 4th R is all about repeat, because reinvention isn't a one-time event. It's this continuous cycle that keeps going on. So how do we keep repeating it? So The practical framework is reflect, reimagine, recalibrate, and then repeat. And that's what I'd urge you to put into your business right now in order that you can ensure that you are going to thrive and survive in the years going forward. Because reinvention is a journey, it is not a destination. And when leaders continually reflect, reimagine, recalibrate, and repeat, they steer their teams away from icebergs of stagnation and chart a course towards success. So, what are we seeing happening in businesses right now that is causing some of these problems? Some of the problems that exist around reinvention are that there's a gap between our awareness and our readiness to actually embrace reinvention. Because the changing operating conditions that we're working in mean that reinvention is something that continually needs to happen. And the problem is, a lot of us as leaders are using old tools in order to try and solve new day problems. And there is the disconnect. And that is very dangerous. Because a lot of the tools that we're looking at were designed for a world when we went in a pretty linear line. But I think we can all agree now that we live in a world where everything is changing and everything, 1 minute we're going one way, then we're going another way. So this is why we need new tools in order to help us navigate all of this continual change. And it's interesting, the average CEO already spends about 47% of their time on reinvention. And interestingly, they say given a choice, they'd push that up to 57%. So if you think about that, means that half of the time of world's leaders is no longer consumed by business as usual, but by reshaping the organization for what's next. And this is why I said at the beginning, reinvention has quietly moved from the margins of the strategy decks to being at the very, very heart of corporate leadership. And for me, it's very clear. Reinvention is no longer a buzzword. It's just how leaders define their job. So my invitation to you this week is have a look. How much of your time you spent reinventing your business? And if it's not at least at that 50% mark, I would encourage you to think about how can you do things differently? If you are stuck in the day-to-day grind of doing work, what do you need to let go of in order for you to have more space to reinvent? Maybe indeed the question to look at is, are you the person that should be leading reinvention in your organization? It's just an interesting thought. So I didn't want to paint a really negative picture, but I think reinvention is such an important topic for us to continually look at. If you'd like to pick my brains more about reinvention, it's a topic I'm very passionate about. And if you are listening to this podcast on the week of the 19th of January, 2026, there is a special reinvention lab happening this week run by my mentor, Dr. Nadia. If you'd like details about that, just reach out to me. It's run by the Reinvention Society and they provide you with incredible tools. And this is what I have begun using with my clients to help my clients reinvent for everything that's going on in 2026 and beyond. So I hope you found this topic useful today, and I'll catch you again soon. Bye-bye.